something's there.
You said when it's the right time, things will happen. So the discovery of the money pit obviously must have happened at the right time. Did you look at it astrologically, what era that was, or under which planet or star or constellation it occurred? Did you look at the astrology of the discovery of money pit?
It's really funny you bring that up because I haven't done a lot with that. I'm going to after we get off the phone in this conversation here.
Okay, you'll do the birth chart of the money pit.
Well, yeah, and well, now here's the thing: is that there's not a specific date for the discovery of a money pit besides 1795. Although this is what's weird about this. You bring, and actually maybe this is the right time on multiple occasions, because last night what I discovered was that the story from, I believe it was a 1958 documentary on Oak Island. It was on a show on TV from 1958. They were saying that they made the discovery in October. And I had never heard that before. They said that the Three Boys was October of 1795. And, you know, October, it can be either way. It's either peaceful Libra or it's, you know, kind of militant Scorpio, depending on where you are in October. So I'm going to...
Maybe it was an article in a local newspaper. I think, where was the first article about the discovery of money pit published? There was a newspaper called the Liverpool Packet. I'm going to look into this, like which newspaper first ran the story back in that era. There were, you know, probably only 2 or 3 newspapers in the entire province. So yeah, I'll look into that, and maybe we'll be able to narrow down the month, if, you know, nothing else. So we have the year, we might be able to narrow down the month. And then also let's consider seasons. You can't do much in the winter. Winters on Oak Island can be brutal, depending on, you know, how cold and snowy it is. So yeah. I would say spring, summer, or autumn.
Right, exactly. That's actually a good point, because there was never any description of them having to go through snow or anything like this. That's right. Really good point.
Right.
Now the question comes up for me too, and like I said, I look at things from every angle. It's very hard to make me. I mean, I welcome all ideas, you know. So even if I believe something, I'm not going to shut someone down if they want to share something with me. And I think it's a really good way to be as a human, actually, because first of all, you don't even know what you're going to discover, and second of all, if you believe strongly enough about what you believe about something, then it shouldn't matter what someone is sharing with you. It shouldn't rattle you, you know. And if it does, then maybe you should look into what they're saying, because maybe it can assist you on your spiritual journey.
Right.
This story about the 3 boys is really interesting because it is staggeringly similar to the story of the 3 knights on the Temple Mount, going beneath the Temple of Solomon, going through the Enochian vaults, and this has been brought up many times. I'm certainly not the first one. The first place that I saw it was Alan Butler, and this was season 2 of The Curse of Oak Island, when the team went to Scotland. I believe they were with Kathleen McGowan too. I hope I'm getting that correct.
Yes.
And Alan Butler gave a theory about the Enochian vaults, and I don't know if I had necessarily seen that before, but when I saw that, by the way, this is interesting too, is that when I saw that episode, it was before I started astrology. So I was being given some of the information before I even know what to do with it, essentially.
So let's talk about Enoch and the Enochian vault. I know that Enoch was one of the 10 patriarchs in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis. He was descended from Seth, who was the son of Adam. He was the great-grandfather of Noah, but Enoch lived before the flood. So he was one of the antediluvial patriarchs, and he lived a real long life. I read somewhere that he lived 365 years, when we think a year has 365 days, but he lived for 365 years. And I read that his name means to initiate or to instruct. And he was considered to be the first prophet of God, because God walked with Enoch and told him things. So what do you know about Enoch, and how does he make sense to you in terms of astrology?
Well, first of all, remember that number 10, because it's going to be very important in a minute. And
10 from 10 patriarchs?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But it's not just, really what the best thing to do when you're looking at the ancient world is to pay attention to the numbers. Always look at the numbers, because that's where you're going to find the real meaning. The numbers don't lie. They can't lie.
So Enoch was the 7th of the 10 patriarchs.
Wonderful. So again, the seven chakra system. And I'll tell you about the 10 in a second here. And actually, maybe what we can do, Alessandra, is if we can bring up maybe the first slide.
Sure. So what's the first slide? I had to rename them.
The first slide should be the 1965 Reader's Digest, the first page of that article.
Okay, here we go. Can you see it?
Yep, great.
Awesome.
Okay, so I'm gonna get to Enoch. I'm gonna get to Enoch in the second slide. So I'm gonna hold on answering that until I do the first initial explanation of the money pit, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. So again, three boys. The story, it's an identical story. Three boys looking for a treasure in a pit that has 9 or 10 layers, essentially. Well, it's the same exact story. The three knights looking for either the Holy Grail or some religious artifact or the Ark of the Covenant in the chambers beneath Solomon's temple. And again, it's 9 or 10, 9 in that case, well, really both. It's nine platforms. So why are they identical? It's literally a perfect match, the story. And I actually don't necessarily think that they're necessarily worth three boys involved. I think that might just be part of the trying to relate the story from Solomon's Temple and the Knights Templar to what's going on in Oak Island. We don't know that there were actually three boys that made an initial discovery. It could have been part of the narrative that was put out, because we have to remember that there were a lot, and still are a lot, of Freemasons involved with this search, and have been historically.
So, in fact, the story of Enochian vault is extremely important to Freemasons. I believe Freemasonry is where it originated from.
Yeah, exactly. They used the Royal Arch degree. You're totally right about that, and we'll get into what the arch even means. Most people, I don't even think people understand what the arch is referring to. We'll get to that in a second. But what I wanted to talk about in this diagram was really some of the initial descriptions of the money pit and what is going on here and what the model is and all this stuff. And like I was saying at the beginning, is pay attention to the numbers. And even as I mentioned before in astrology, is that the numbers don't lie. And it's really the language of the universe is numbers. It's mathematics. It's angles and shapes and all these types of things. That's the true information. Okay, so we have that matching up in the beginning, the three boys and the three knights, which for me calls into question if they're even worth three boys, or if they're just trying to mimic the story from Solomon's Temple. So we have that correlation happening. And then the next thing that we have happening is, okay, so the boys, by the way, they see it. I think what I think was an orb. There were green lights, supposedly, right? Or something. That's how they depict on the show. I'm not sure if they were green, but there were lights hovering around the money pit. And that's immediately suspect to me again, because when you're tying in the mystical aspects of Oak Island and the pillars of fire and all of these other things, there's something that's otherworldly also happening on the island. They don't have to be related. I think they are in some way, but you can't, or you shouldn't, ignore some of the weirder stories when you're also looking at the science. You really want to be able to look at both, and then you'd be very surprised what you come out with. Okay, so the boys go up to, they see a depression in the ground. Of course, there was the paving stone, what's called the threshing floor. Alan Butler talked about that. Initially, it was a paved flagstone floor from the ancient world, and what you would do is you would thresh the wheat to get the edible parts of the wheat to separate from the chaff, and so that you could eat the wheat harvest. And you would do it. You put all the wheat on this, a flat, I guess roughly circular area, and you would thresh it and to get the kernels of the wheat out. So it came to also symbolize a spiritual meaning, is that we're threshing out the darker spiritual principles so that we can move to the higher or the lighter principles. And that's really what that means in terms of the money pit area. So what they were roughly 2 feet, supposedly 2 feet tall. And this is the first number that's for, well, it's actually not the first one, because the 3 boys, that was the first one. And the 9 platforms in the temple of Solomon in the Enochian vaults beneath the temple, and the 9 platforms beneath the ground in the money pit. Same story. Okay, so now the depression is described as being 12 feet wide or 13 feet wide. I've heard both, and I've read both in some of the older texts and documents that come from the beginning of the search. So, immediately when I see those 2 numbers again, right here, the zodiac has 12 signs.
Yeah, we have 12 months in the year.
Exactly, which I'm glad you brought that up, because the word month is based on moon, M-O-N, and of course moon is M-O-O-N. And the thing about that is that the moon cycle is really, it's like a 13-month year, because it's like 28, 27 to 27, between 27 and 29 days cycle each month, which comes out to actually 13 months and not 12 months.
What about the human body? How many ribs do we have in the rib cage on each side?
It's 12.
Yeah, there you go.
Also 12. Which again, you're right. The similarities, and there's 12 cranial nerves on the top of the brain up there, or actually I think it's on the bottom of the brain, excuse me. And they all correspond to this right here. We're talking about the different signs of the zodiac, exactly, in the mental and spiritual world. So in any case, it's as if it wasn't already symbolic enough. Now we have the 12 and 13 motif showing up. Why did they create it 12 or 13 feet? Why didn't they make it 14 feet? Why wasn't it 16 feet? And the more, the more of these things you see lining up like that, you're saying, no, this was intentional. And by the way, I also heard that it started at 13 feet and it narrowed down in a cone shape to a 7-foot diameter pole. So again, here's the 7. You got the 12, the 13, the 7. Of course, the 7 chakras. Again, we talked about that earlier. But you're seeing the motifs. You're seeing the numbers come up. This is something I literally just discovered this week. I was really excited about this. I had not seen this. Yeah, I had not seen this before. And I do not think anyone has ever stated this before or found this, because again, I don't know if people really know what they're looking for necessarily in terms of the numbers related to the money pit. So the block and tackle, which again is a Freemason symbol, everything so far that we've described is Freemasonry also. It's the Knights Templar teachings, it's the ancient teachings that go back before the Freemasons, but really you're talking about all the Freemason numbers, all of the motifs are in place, and there's a lot more coming up, and I'm going to show most of them here.
I just want to say, Dave, that if money pit was discovered in October, that's the 10th month, so number 10.
Yeah, there you go. Very, 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 very good, Alessandra. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And you're going to see where 10 comes in again in a second.
Okay.
So, and you talked about Enoch being the one of 10 patriarchs and everything. He
was the 7th of the 10th.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Number 7.
And which is, we just talked about 7 again too, and the importance of that. Okay, so the block and tackle, which again is a Freemasonry symbol, is also, I believe, a Rosicrucian symbol. You can see that in a lot of their paintings and drawings and everything. The block and tackle was hanging above on an oak tree, by the way, which is that's a druid symbol. I mean, the oak tree was the wisdom for the druids. And there's some question about if there was for me at least, a possible ancient Irish involvement or druid involvement with actually the whole eastern seaboard of North America. For me, it's something that I've been tracing for a while, that kind of that idea of history. So there's a possibility of that too in terms of the oak, but the block and tackle was hanging 16 feet according to this article right here in front of us in 1965 Reader's Digest, above the depression.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 16. Now that doesn't necessarily mean something yet until you look at another number, which is 32, which is half of 32.
Okay.
So we'll get to 32. We'll get to 32 in a minute because that's going to come in a lot. And again, 32 is also Freemasonry. Okay, so now what we have, we talked about the threshing floor. Okay, so the platforms, Alessandra, the platforms every 10 feet.
Right, 10 feet apart.
Wasn't every 8 feet or even 9 feet. This is what's important too about when you're talking about 9 versus 10, is that the first number, well, I mean, you have, of course, the block and tackle, but the first thing that you see after the 13 and the 12, which is the diameter of the top of the money pit, is 10. So you're seeing that there's 10 feet between each platform. Okay, so why is it 10? Well, we'll get to that in a second. Now, in terms of actual platforms, there was described to be 9 actual platforms, but then there's a description in this article and other articles about a possible, an anomaly basically around 100 feet, which would be the 10th platform. Okay. So you had the 90-foot stone at the 9th platform. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get to that in a second. All right, so every 10 feet, and then of course the 90-foot stone at the 9th platform, 9th level. And guess what it says on the 90-foot stone? It says 10 feet below, or it says 40 feet below. Again, there were 2 translations at least. So if it's 10 feet below, there's your 10 again. And then it's also telling you that 10 feet below 90, what is that? That's 100. That would be the 10th platform.
I want to say something about the 90-foot stone.
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
I was reading about Enoch, and the story goes that he built this vault with 9 chambers with arch ceiling. So there were these 9 chambers stacked on top of each other, and he built that inside the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, before the temple even stood there. And at the bottom, so either the 9th chamber from top or the 1st chamber from the bottom, depending on which direction you're looking at, he placed a gold plate in the shape of a triangle. It had jewels on it, and he engraved it with the ineffable name of God, or true name of God. And that's what's inside the Enochian chamber or Enochian vault.
Yeah.
So could the 90-foot stone have been an attempt to replicate this triangular gold plate that carried the ineffable name of God? So maybe the inscription on the 90-foot stone wasn't about treasure, but maybe it had to do with who God is or what his name is. And maybe the 90-foot stone wasn't rectangular, maybe it was triangular. What do you think about that?
Exactly. Well, you're right. It's a direct correlation. Usually it's called the Delta stone in the Enochian model at the 9th level, 90 feet down. And you're right, it has a name of God on it. And you're right, it's a treasure, or it's a spiritual treasure. The spiritual treasure is God. It's finding God. It's finding the higher self, or the divine self. And also, by the way, it just reminded me that supposedly the 90-foot stone was upside down, according to some accounts, which, again, according to some accounts, I've seen that, again, it would be facing the 10th platform, which the focus is, it's going to be the 10th platform. The focus is not, the 9th platform is your last, the last step before you reach God, essentially. And the 10th level is God. And I'll explain this in terms of the ancient cosmology, and you guys are going to see how this all fits in. But I agree with that. And it's not necessarily a gold treasure or a silver treasure or Ark of the Covenant or something like that. It's also just teaching you about the real treasure is God. That's the whole point. That's the point of life, is to meld with that purity and that level of kindness and generosity and love and all of these things. So that is part of the meaning too, and that's definitely the spiritual meaning behind this. But it's also, well, I'll get to it in a second, but it's a model. It's a model of ancient cosmology, is what I'm going to get to in a second here. And I
Dave,
don't think that's been brought up before.
Dave, it has just occurred to me that there was a stone found in a Native American mound in the United States. I believe it's called Bat Creek Stone. Have you heard about it?
You may have sent it to me before. I'm trying to remember.
Okay, so I'm going to just briefly mention the Bat Creek Stone. It was found inside, I believe, a Cherokee mound, and it was under the person's head, or at the time it was a skull. So the stone was placed under a skull, and what was engraved on it was the name of God, Yahweh, and the stone was upside down too. So the name of God, the writing was on the bottom. And when archaeologists found it, they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, but then they would have flipped it over and seen the symbols, and they couldn't read Hebrew. The archaeologists that found that stone didn't recognize it was Hebrew, and they probably just put the stone in storage. Then it was on display in a museum, and at one point in time, some students of archaeology, they discovered the stone, and they looked at it and they said, well, the stone is upside down. So they turned it the right way, and one of them said, well, that's the name of God. And then it became this big controversy, because what's a Hebrew stone doing in a Cherokee mound, right? So then another story was invented that, oh, it was fake and whatever, and not real, and it was the archaeologists who faked the stone, right? So it turned into this big scandal, but it is a stone that was found in a mound, in a burial mound. It's a flat stone. It has the name of God in Hebrew, and it was upside down. So what you said, that this 90-foot stone was also like face down, right? That would be like a very similar situation.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that brings up a whole different question about who came to United States or North America when.
Yes.
Could be Phoenicians, could be Hebrews. I mean, the Mormons, I have a lot of Mormon friends. I work with LDS a lot. And I actually been to many of those sites in the United States as well that Joseph Smith had been to. And I mean, they say that Jesus was in America when he was in Israel, but he was also over here. So, and that's the backbone of a lot of what they believe. And so we really need to look at this stuff seriously.
And
I think that's
the Cherokee people, they had a legend in their oral tradition that they took in some Jewish or Hebrew refugees, and it would have been probably like in the 1st century. And they might have been some exiles from the Holy Land at the time, who were running away from Romans. Now that's another story, but why not?
Yeah, exactly. We just, like I was saying before too, is that we can give educated guesses, but I also believe that we need to be humble about it, because I didn't see it, no one else saw it. So we need to try to reserve the judgment. And if someone comes out with what we think is an outlandish idea, just listen to them. Like, if they've got some good evidence, we don't know what happened. Like I was saying before, the ancient world was magical. So back in the ancient world, I mean, pretty much anything nothing would surprise me in terms of it being able to happen. But yeah, that's a really good point. And the reason that, like I said before, that it's inverted is because it's pointing towards the 10th level, the 10th platform, which is actually, that's really where you find God. It's at number 10. And number 10 is the completion.
And if you were standing inside the 10th vault or chamber looking up, then you would be seeing that stone with the name of God engraved on it, right?
Right, exactly. If your perspective was from the top, then you would be seeing the engraving. That's a really good point. And you really you want that to be where your perspective is. And I'll get into what that means astrologically and cosmologically in a second, so that people can see which model I'm pulling from when I'm looking at the money pit model and the Enochian vault model. But in any case, so back to 90-foot stone, it either said 10 feet below, which again is, it's saying 10 again, and then it's saying 10 feet below on the 10th platform is essentially what it's saying. And then not to mention, they're all 10 feet in between each additional platform. So it's saying 10 over and over again. The engraving possibly was pointing towards 10. It's saying focus on 10, pay attention to 10. It's all about 10.
Right.
It's over and over and over and over. It's like, okay, I get it. 10. We need to do 10. Okay, but if it said 40 feet below, that's still pretty good because that's 13. 40 feet below is 130 feet below the 90-foot level. And I'm actually okay with that too. That would fit with me. I'd be okay with 13. 13 is also a number of completion, just like 10 is. And so either one I'm fine with. And by the way, we already saw 13, in the diameter of the top of the money pit, 12 or 13. So we're seeing that.
Dave, how is the number 13 the number of completion? What does that mean?
Well, because 12, if you're looking at, for instance, if you're looking at the zodiac, which is really where you want to be looking at when you're talking about 12, there's 12 signs. There's 12 signs, but it's really hard to describe this. Well, let me just describe it this way. The first way I'm going to describe it, by the way, we just had Friday the 13th, so maybe that's a good way to describe it.
There is a 13th sign, Dave. I read about it somewhere. Yep. It's what's his name?
It's called Ophiuchus.
Ophiuchus, yeah. So it's a man who has a serpent wrapped around him, or he's holding a great serpent, and it's this. It's supposed to be a constellation that's behind the sun, so we never see it directly.
Well, I'll get to that in a second. Man, we just have so much to talk about. It's just fantastic.
Well, I'm connecting dots in my head.
Oh, exactly. Well, let me just go to this because it's the easiest example. It would be the Last Supper. Now, the Last Supper, it was the 12 disciples. Yes. Which, by the way, it's disciple. That's how you spell it. This is the disc. That's why there's 12. Okay, or the apostle is the post. These are the posts. So it's either the disc or the post. Either way, you're talking about this.
You're right. So 12 disciples standing for or corresponding to 12 months, 12 signs. And then Jesus was the 13th, or he was the first, maybe he was the first actually, plus 12.
That's exactly where I was going. You're a step ahead of me.
Okay.
13, it was 12 plus Jesus. Jesus was the 13th. So Jesus, the 13th, what it means is it means all 12 together. And that makes the unity, which is the 13th, which is the one. It's actually 1 and 13 at the same time.
Or the 13th one was Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, I mean, you could go with that too, which is the divine, which is
just throwing it out there.
Yeah, which is the divine feminine, which is just as good. So in any case, yeah, it's the completion of 12. We already talked about the 12 months, which is, if you're talking about a lunar calendar, it's actually 13 months. Okay. If you're talking about the great year, it oscillates between 24,000 and 26,000. It's actually 25,920 is the number I use for what's called the great year. And that's right between 24 and 26, which is 2 times 12 or 2 times 13. So it's this thing, it's actually kind of going back and forth like this. It's moving between 12 and 13 with the favor. I mean, it's not even really a favor because it's both at the same time. It's the same concept with 32 and 33. It's the same exact thing. It's the 32 is the step before the completion, which is 33. And 33
it is said that Jesus lived 33 years, right?
Exactly. And that's the reason for that. Well, there's many reasons, but the easiest one to understand mathematically is that that's exactly 1/3 of the Trinity. And you know what that comes out to? It's either 99 or 100. So again, now if you're talking about 99, that's the number of heaven or God, or 999. Well, it just takes one additional step, and then you have the completion, which is 100 or 1,000. So it actually it exists in many places. It's 12 and 13, 32 and 33, and also 99 and 100.
Don't we also have 33 vertebrae in our spine?
That's right. Yep. And if you're drawing it into biology, there's 33 vertebrae, which is also the stairway to heaven when you're
Mhm.
talking about those traditions. So I mean, there was even a spiral in the money pit supposedly.
That's what
Um,
the Restals said, that that was their theory, that there was a spiral at the bottom of Money Pit, like a
right.
spiral tunnel.
And you know what's interesting about that is that some of those numbers, and I know that's hanging in the Oak Island Visitor Center. That when I was there in 2017 and 2018, there was a diagram of what the Rustals drew with the spiral tunnel.
I have a
And
photo of it, yes.
oh, okay, well, if in that number, there's a lot of interesting numbers in there, but I believe they said that the junctures of the spiral were about 12 feet apart, if I'm not
Wow.
mistaken. So
Wow,
you
that's
have
amazing, Dave.
yeah, so all of this stuff it's all in there. And I don't know if this it's probably not intact anyway. Maybe some of the spiral, I have no idea. But like I was saying, is that when you're talking about Oak Island, the way that we're gonna figure this out is it's by numbers, it's science, but you have to, and here's the thing, if you don't know the spiritual meaning of these numbers, then it doesn't matter if it's 12 or 13. But if you know that 12 or 13 suggests something very important, then they're using the science and the spiritual discipline to illustrate something.
So
And that's what we have to do.
Dave, who would have had this kind of knowledge at that time? Let's say the Money Pit does date to the 1700s when Freemasons would have been in Nova Scotia, and they were a secret fraternity. They were frowned upon by the church, right? So they kept to themselves. Um, would the Freemasons have had this knowledge and then designed a money pit like this with all this encoded into it, the number of platforms, the spacing, the diameter of it?
They know what they're doing in terms of mathematics, that I believe that they could have designed this no problem.
Okay.
Also the Rosicrucians, of course, the Knights Templar, any of those groups. And then there's another, well, I'll get to that. I alluded to it before, but if what we're talking about is maybe 10,000 years old, something was buried 10,000 years ago, then we're talking about a completely different story. And because these numbers, the numbers I'm describing and depicting here, they are they've been in existence throughout the entirety of time. So it's really not about a group. These numbers they're enmeshed and they're stamped into the fabric of the solar system.
Hmm.
So it's
Okay.
not, this stuff existed way before any secret society or group, wisdom group or whatever you want to call it. But
Right.
the people in the near term who would have understood this, yeah, any of those three groups that I just mentioned,
Okay.
could have done this, and I would have said, yeah, that was their work. But anyway, it's going to get more interesting because it just gets even better. This is
Okay.
we're still kind of in the beginning stages here. Okay, so now the description is at 98 feet, there was a crowbar that was thrust down beneath the ninth platform or beneath the stone, and it hit something at I guess about 98 feet. Which
Hmm.
again, it's right at that level. It's right at that 100 foot or the 99 foot, whichever number you want to use is fine with me. It's that level you're talking about. So the focus was not the 90-foot stone, it was something 10 feet below the 90-foot stone, which again,
Right.
as I had mentioned, it's 10, 10, 10, 10 over and over. And it's the number of completion, it's the number of God. It's showing you, well, I mean, it's either 9 or 10, either one is fine. Um, but they hit something there, and they
Hmm.
hit actually quite a few things there, and I believe it was described as treasure chests or several treasure chests on top of each other. I
Hmm.
think that's where the McGinnis story comes from, with the three chests stacked on top of each other. And of course, where the gold cross comes from, supposedly that's still in their family. That was featured on the show a while back. So anyway, there's a question for me about if there even were treasure chests. I still don't even know if any of this part of the story, if any of this part of the story was real, and I'll get to that in a second too. But the
So,
point is,
yes.
okay, well, I was gonna say the point is for this, the 90-foot level or the ninth platform, is that the focus is on the 10th platform or the 10th level. And we know that they put the crowbar down, they hit something. They never got to see what it was, supposedly, because, of course, of the flooding, which I'm going to get to in a second. Actually, I guess it's next up here. So the flooding occurs at the 90-foot level, or just below the 90-foot level. You have this flooding event that occurs. Well, there's something that happens here in the model of the ancient model of the solar system. And I actually have a diagram of this. It'll make it easier, but I just want to say it first, just so people can kind of have an idea. In the ancient cosmology, the 90-foot level, or the 9th level, is called the crystalline sea. The crystalline sea, which is a saltwater sea, because you're talking about crystals, which is the salt crystal. So they even knew, yeah, okay, in order to make this match up to the ancient model, we're going to make sure that we flood it at the 90 foot, because that's where the crystalline sea is in the model of the solar system. And
Dave, if I may jump in, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Sorry, be patient. There's ice in Oort cloud. And right. You said that once we leave Oort cloud, we're out of the system. So there's even ice water, solidified ice crystals in the Oort cloud.
Exactly. And that's even, it even affects the Kuiper belt, which is inside of the Oort cloud, and some of the other outer planets, such as Neptune. I think Neptune and Uranus are mostly like icy gas, I guess, or some plasma state or something. But yeah, you're right, Alessandra. It all matches up, so that's why I'm saying is that if we go into this and we don't have a full understanding of where do these depictions come from? I'm talking about before the Freemasons and even before the Knights Templar. What does this mean? We can figure it out because it goes back to the original first teaching of the planet, which is of the cosmology. It's the planets and stars and the human body, like we've been saying many times. They're corollary.
Well, in the Norse mythology, there are ice giants that live at the edge of the human world. So I wonder if ice giants didn't just mean icebergs floating in the sea that the Vikings would encounter, but maybe it was a reference to our world, how it's structured and how there is ice at that 9th level.
Yeah, or it could even be the ice giants in terms of the planets, because they're giant planets.
Right.
Or you know what, Alessandra, it could be all three. It probably is all three, because these traditions, they don't happen on one level. They're stacked meanings on top of each other. That's like a Russian nesting dolls, that you have 10, 12, 20 levels of meaning. They're all true. And so
yes, go ahead.
Well, if someone's trying to figure out which one is true, I say, well, you know what?
Maybe they're all true.
Yeah, either they're all true or there's multiple at the same time. It's usually not one, it's multiple. And it's hard to do that because people want to put their finger on one thing and say it's this. Right. But I encourage people to say, well, like I was saying at the beginning, keep your mind open to all the possibilities, because we don't know if it's one. It might be multiple.
Yes, exactly. And I'm always amazed how wise and insightful our ancestors were. The farther you go in history, the farther you go in time, the farther back you go in time, the more you discover these amazing schools of thought and like pockets of knowledge where you wonder, how did they know that without, giant telescopes or sending probes into space? How did they map the solar system? How did they understand the Oort cloud? How did they see the chakras and understand that there are energy centers in the body and that they all have function and resonate at certain frequency and all that? It's like we are the children with our knowledge now, with the science, with the technology we are like in kindergarten, and at least I feel like that sometimes, where I'm just amazed, like, how did they know that without the technology, the computing power we have now? We have quantum computers now and DNA computers, and they didn't have that, but they knew that.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's two possibilities for that, really, is that we either had assistance from up here, from above, whether you call that divine or you call that alien or you call that a sky person or whatever you want to call that. dragons. I mean, it could be all of them. Again, all of them, one of them, whatever it is. They came down to help us, to get humans in line and to teach us. And even the teachings of the fallen angels and the watchers, that's exactly how it is that we had watchers, well, maybe not necessarily watchers, but the fallen angels came down to help us to understand science and technology and the stars and medicine and all this stuff. And it's part of the story throughout the entire world. You're saying that, okay, so we had some assistance. It wasn't that we just randomly discovered this stuff. No, we had guidance. Or the other way to do it is through the meditation principle, is that you can pull divine wisdom directly from the ether or from the the Akashic records. It doesn't have to be a god or a demigod or something like that.
Or it comes out of the mouth of a prophet, right? Somebody who was sent here as a messenger, really, to deliver message.
Right, like a human prophet, divinely inspired human prophet. Yep, I agree. Okay, so anyway, I want to say one last thing about the 90-foot level is that it's ruled by Neptune, which of course, again, is the ocean, or it's Poseidon. It's the same figure or person. Of course, it's also a planet. So to have it flood, again, not at 70 feet or 60 feet, it's flooding at 90 feet, which is where it's supposed to flood according to the model that's being followed. This 10 model and this 90 model and all this stuff, and pointing towards 10 and saying God is this way, and you find the treasure when you get down to the 10th plat. It's all cosmology. All of it's cosmology.
So the planet Neptune was, of course, the god of the ocean, also called Poseidon. So it was Neptune who ruled ocean, and here we have seawater coming in through the flood tunnel, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I just look at it and I just shake my head because, I mean, I don't even have to guess. It's right in front of me. It's exact copy of the cosmology. It's not just a copy of the Enochian Vault. The Enochian Vault is a copy of the cosmology and of the human body, which I'm going to show in a second. But the last thing I want to say about the money pit directly is that this is something that no one ever really talks about, and I don't know why, because it's so strange. It's so strange.
Let's hear it.
Well, we have all the numbers that I have already been describing. Well, there's another number, and it's 32. Now we know about this. We know about the Freemasons and 32, and you, of course, you'd mentioned 33. They're in tandem with each other. They really go hand in hand. 33 is the completion number for 32. Well, when one of the companies came back after they had tried to probe down to the 10th platform, of course, the money pit had flooded. And when they took a measurement of the money pit, the water, it flooded to within 32 feet of the ground level.
Oh.
Now, how do you do that? There's no way.
How do you construct a pit that will flood at up to 32 feet?
Exactly. You have to make sure that either they would have had to build the ground up to make sure that they're going to know where they're hitting the ocean level. I suppose it could be done, but all I'm saying is that all of the numbers are there, all of the key numbers, and every single thing was taken care of very, very, very closely and clearly and very deliberately. So now how about this? So we have a 32, okay? Again, why not 35 feet? And a lot of times when people are describing, I think I've seen some of the articles that says, yeah, it was about 35 feet to the surface from the flood level to the surface of the island. And then I'm saying, well, I don't want to know about. I want you to tell me if it was 33 or 32, because there's a big difference between 32 or 33 and 35. I think the reason people round up is because you're just rounding up to a multiple of 5, You'd either say 30 or 35. Because people will think, why are you telling me it was 30? I don't care it was 32. I mean, 35 is good enough for me. Well, it does matter. And it was 30, like you see in this picture right here, it says 32 feet, the flood line. Okay, so the other thing we know is that the island was broken up into 32 lots.
Oh my goodness, are you kidding me? You're right. 32 lots.
Which we know, I mean, everyone knows, a lot of people know that. We just are not putting all the pieces together.
Wow.
And we know that I think it was about 1754, maybe it was roughly when the island was first parceled out into land lots and
Wow.
plots and everything like that. And we know that a lot of the first landowners there were Freemasons. That's not a big surprise.
Right.
And people, of course, been involved the entire time. But I have to say this, that I can say this for sure, is that splitting the island into 32 lots, that was a Freemason endeavor. There's no question. Because, a piece of land is not broken into lots until you break it into lots yourself.
Right. Why did that guy choose 32 instead of 20 or 10? He could have given them larger lots, right?
Yeah, exactly. So either now here's the big question, is that did they know about an ancient mystery, the Freemasons, before they came over to North America? Or are they the ones that made the money pit? Or was the money,
did they put the mystery there?
exactly. Now here's the other thing, is the money pit might not have even been real. And I'm just saying that because, like I said, I have to look at every angle. I know there's something weird that's really powerful down C1, and I don't know if it's related to the money pit story. And that's, for me, it might be a potential side story. But how about this, and I'm not putting anyone under the bus. I'm just saying, hypothetically, this is possible. So the Freemasons show up. They want to have an initiation site that is a model. They want it to be exactly how it was in the ancient world in Solomon's temple with the Enochian vaults. So either they dug that pit themselves as an exact copy of the Temple Mount, what's underneath the Temple Mount, or the entire story was a complete fabrication, and it's just something that was passed on in the lore of the Freemasons who started up, when they came over from Europe to North America, and they just said, okay, so we're gonna keep everything in line with our teachings. Now, the weird part about this, however, for me, is that when they found the human bone in H8, it was dated to like 1650 or 1680 or something like that. Now, if that date is correct, that calls a few things into question for me, because as we're going to get to in a second, we're going to talk about the Sintra well in a minute here in Portugal, which was featured on the second to last episode of this season of The Curse of Oak Island. And these chambers and these vaults, they were used as initiation areas. We know that from the ancient world. So either the money,
and the name Enoch means to initiate. So
exactly.
There we go.
So either there's three possible things for me. Either the Freemasons somehow knew that the money pit was there, and it's from way ancient antiquity, like way before anyone could possibly imagine, possibly. And they knew it was there, and so they decided to set up in Chester, and then they kept an eye on it, and they used that as their initiation site. So it might have been pre-existing, or they could have dug it themselves according to the model of the Enochian vault and the cosmology, or it never existed and they made it up for their own lore and mythology, and as potentially initiate an initiation site on the island. The other weird thing about this story is that the 90-foot stone, I guess it's probably still missing. It potentially might have been found. We don't really know, but that we do know that was put in the book bindery in Halifax, and it was used to raise money. Now we don't know where that money went. Right. So how, and I'm just saying, again, I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate, but how easy would it be to say, oh, we found this great mystery and we're trying to raise funds so that we can continue the search, and meanwhile the funds are going in their back pocket?
That's possible, but
it could be a ploy. That's all I'm saying.
I want to say a couple of things, Dave, if I may. So there, first of all, I'm not aware of any other initiation sites that's in existence in Nova Scotia. If there were Freemasons among the colonists who came to Nova Scotia, and the first, of course, still in existence, the greatest city in Nova Scotia is Halifax. It was established by the British Navy, really. All the Freemasons would have been in Halifax, right? That's where probably all the work was, all the jobs, and I don't think that there would have been a ton of Freemasons along the South Shore, and somehow we ended up with this crop of Freemasons on Oak Island.
Right, right.
So that's very suspicious right there.
I
And
know.
so I feel like if the money pit on Oak Island was an initiation site or some kind of an initiation well or initiation vault, it would have been the only one of its kind in the entire province. And maybe even Freemasons from United States would have come up there to do something, you know.
Oh yeah.
And
Yep.
if the imagine Freemasons living in Halifax, you know, they were a secret society, fraternity. The church wouldn't have liked them, so they kept their meetings secret. And then they probably wouldn't have built an initiation site in Halifax because, you know, that's where all the traffic and attention was.
Right.
They didn't want exposure. So maybe they did set up something on Oak Island because it was out of sight. And then they, you know, a few of their guys set up shop on Oak Island and just started living there. So Freemasons might have congregated on Oak Island in the 1700s or 1800s, and no one would ever know. So,
Right.
so that's one thing I wanted to mention. There is no other initiation site in Nova Scotia. This would be it. And
Right.
the other thing I wanted to say is when people wonder what was in the chamber under the 90-foot stone, I want to go back to the Enochian vault. So the legend says that what Enochian vault contained, other than the triangular gold plate, I think it's also called, you said Delta stone, but would also the name tetragrammaton mean anything? Could that
Yeah,
be
it
applied
might be it.
to it? Okay, so so that gold triangle was on top of a marble pillar. There were actually two pillars in the last chamber. One of them was made of marble because it was resistant to fire, or would have been resistant to fire. And the other pillar was made of brass because it's resistant to water. So Enoch would have wanted two pillars made of materials that would resist, you know, catastrophe, either a fire or flooding. And what he engraved on those pillars was the history of creation and the principles of arts and sciences. So do you think that's what was hidden at the bottom of the muddy pit? What do you think? Two pillars under the 90-foot stone?
The pillars, that's, I can actually comment on that too, because that's, well, there's two ways to look at that. Actually, if you want to pull up the next slide,
Yeah.
Alison, I have the Enochian model up here, and we can start talking about that.
So let's look at the Enochian model.
Okay, now one of the things I'll say for the pillars while you're getting that pulled up is that.
Is this the one?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Okay, so the pillars are, you know, one of the ways you can look at it is like the pillars of Hercules, for instance, from the ancient world. But the pillars were meant to hold up the firmament, to hold up the pillars of the earth, you know, holding up the sky above us and everything like that. That's really the meaning for cosmology with that. And then in the human body, the two pillars, generally the way that there's actually two, I'm sure there's more than two, but there's two that I use, two explanations. One of them is talking about the human spine, which, by the way, this looks exactly like a human spine with ribs on it. You already mentioned.
I was just thinking it's the rib cage.
Now, I'm sure they did that. I am sure they did that on purpose, by the way, whoever drew this, because it is a model of the human body and it's the model of cosmology. It's both. But anyway, the central column of the spinal column in the Hindu tradition is called the Sushumna, and there's two. There really actually is the two serpents on either side. That's where this story comes in, and the caduceus symbol. That's where all this comes in. One of them is called the Pingala, and one of them is called the Ida, and they're nerves that wind up the spine. And the point where they meet, the point at where all three of them meet, where the two, the positive and negative polarity and then the neutral polarity meet, that's the chakra, because it creates an energy vortex when you have all the energies meeting at that point when they cross. So anyway, the two pillars, it's the same thing with Jesus and the two thieves. It's the same exact motif. You're saying the middle column and you're saying the two side columns, or, the Trinity, and the 33, which is a third of the Trinity. Okay, so, and the other one, which is a lot lesser known, but probably even more important potentially, is a structure in the brain called the fornix. And the fornix is two pillars that essentially lead to the third ventricle, which leads to the pineal gland. So when you talk about where do you meet God, you're talking about, I mean, either the 7th chakra or the 10th chakra. Either one is pretty okay to say. They're really both true and to certain extents. So that's where this column motif is coming in. And by the way, the columns were also outside of the Temple of Solomon, not just underneath. And that's the same thing. The temple, when you talk about the temple, every temple is a model of a human skull. Now that's something that is not well known, but we know that the temple is right here. That's what we call the temple. If you go straight, if you put your two fingers on either side of your head and you go straight in, you're actually going to hit the
amygdala.
Well, the amygdala is Mary Magdalene, and that's I believe it's a little bit lower, but I believe if you go here, and then if you go to the third eye, it takes you straight back to the pineal gland, which again, that's the whole point of that. It's either that, or it might be closer to the pituitary gland, I think, actually, potentially, which is it sits in a cavity kind of low down in the top of the neck.
No. Pituitary gland is under the like at the base, or sorry, the bottom of the brain near the optical nerves. Then pineal gland is here. That's the so-called third eye. So that's right behind the forehead. What's in the throat is the thyroid and parathyroid.
Well, what I'm saying is that I'm saying at the base of the skull, where the base of the skull meets the top of the neck, kind of up into this region.
Oh, okay.
It's something called the sphenoid bone, and the pituitary gland sits inside the sphenoid, and the pineal gland is towards the back. It's the middle back kind of. But in any case, the point is that it's all biology and it's all cosmology, and it will always be that way. That's the original teaching. That's the teaching before all religion. It's about your body and it's about the stars. Of course it is. What else is it?
And in the creation myth, isn't it said that God took one of Adam's ribs while Adam was sleeping and created woman out of Adam's ribs? So does it mean Adam had 13 ribs? Because now we just have 12. So would Adam have had a 13th rib that was then taken and used to create the first woman?
That's interesting to think about that. The thing that it made me think of, though, is the possible, and I really don't want to get into a lot of this, but the possible hybridization of the human species in the ancient world. Taking DNA samples, taking parts of the body. I mean, we know that this kind of stuff happens with, for instance, cattle mutilations and things like that. Ties in a lot of strange questions, to be honest with you. But yeah, of course it could, 12, 13.
Right, 12 and then 13, right? You said that 13 was the completion of 12.
Yep, that's right. So in any case, but before us here, we have the Enochian model. I believe this is from a Freemason picture at some point in the past. I don't really know the year. But this is a model of the Enochian vault. It's really the only one I could find for some strange reason, but it's got the 9 levels. In this model, you have, well, I suppose you have it both. You have kind of God on the top there above the ground, and also the platform at the very bottom, you have God as well. And it is, in fact, it is that way. And I'll show you the cosmology in a second. There's an above portion and there's a below portion. And the money pit is a model of the below portion. And also of course, the Enochian vault is a model of the below portion, which in the ancient cosmology depicts the below portion as the hellish realm, or the hells, the 10 hells. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It can be just an inversion, because you have ground. Actually people do this. They build towers. And sometimes the towers have 10 levels. If you built the Tower of Babel, I mean, I don't know how many levels that had, but you can depict it either way. You can depict it as a form of a tower, or you can depict it in the form of an inverted tower, which would be a chamber or the vault system or the money pit. But one is going below the ground, one is going above the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle is Earth, which is actually true because the base of the tower is Earth and the top of the money pit is also Earth. So you're going to see in a second when we go on to the next slide, it's an exact model of the cosmology.
Okay.
Let's see, what else do I want to say about Enochian Vault? Okay, so this is where I want to draw. We already talked about the three knights, the three boys. I mentioned Alan Butler, who is the first person that I want to give him credit because that's the person who introduced this concept to me in terms of the Enochian Vault.
Sure.
So a vault is defined as a, let's see, I wrote this down here, what did I write?